CNT125, Chapter 10. We just got done with a section on different detection methods, cameras, motion detectors, asset tags, those kind of things. At the end of that section, there's a series of questions that should be questions that you're thinking about and are planning for with your physical security. First one is like, what rooms are critical, that must be secured, your main server closet, your main network closet, etc. Through what means might an intruder gain access to fill in the blank? Is there a window that can be broken? Is there a door that, could easily be broken through, kind of thing? What are the vulnerabilities for these physical, these important resources? How and to what extent are authorized personnel granted entry? Is it the proximity card? Is it a cipher code? Is it a combination lock? And from that, do we have reference checks, background checks, that sort of thing? Can hours to these people be restricted to work hours? Would that affect, emergency situations, etc.? If you have a lost ID badge or a lost key, what do you do? What's the procedure? Those are all pieces of this physical security. What are employees instructed to do about entering, leaving secure area, propping doors open, those kind of things? Are authentication methods difficult to forge or circumvent? If a name badge is left laying around, what could they do with that? What were they able to do with that? Do supervised security personnel make periodic physical checks, making sure doors are locked, doors aren't propped open, that sort of thing? Any combination codes, getting access and combinations, that sort of thing. Are these maintained securely and changed frequently? What's the plan for documenting and responding to a physical security breach? All these are questions that should be used in planning for your physical security in your building. We move on to a section on device hardening. Device hardening are the steps we do to secure a device or network from attacks. And this is usually multiple layers of defense that can be implemented. So think back. Think about in this chapter, and actually for the future chapter, and some things we've already done. If you think about switches, we did VLANs. We have subnets for the different groups of users. We're going to be doing some things in this lab where we shut off ports that we aren't using. One of the labs we're going to be doing next, we're going to be doing access lists to filter users and what they can and cannot do. These are all pieces of the puzzle in addition to the things you're learning here and reading here about updating software, patching software, malware, checking malware, updating malware, etc. There's multiple layers in this, in securing your network and securing your devices. So updates and security patches, updates to applications, operating systems, device firmware. These are going to happen. So as they happen, we need to be aware of, plan for, etc. We'll talk about that in a minute. Patches come along. These are usually smaller things, but again, there needs to be a plan for when these come through. What's our plan to implement them and roll them out company-wide? Is it something we learn today, test today, and roll out, after work, after people go home for the day? What's the plan? And obviously, what's the plan if it does cause systems to get goofed up? What's your plan to recover from and test and implement and so forth? So with this, process of properly managing applying security patches includes the following. And these are roughly the steps that you work through. So first one, discovery. What's on your network to protect it? Good documentation is going to help with this. So let's say you have a certain operating system and you see there is a update out there for that operating system. Okay, well, I need to pay attention to that. Or maybe it's for an operating system you don't have. Okay, well, we don't have that, but we'll be aware in case any employees do bring a device in that has that operating system. Standardization. In your network, you might have a variety of different nodes, different desktops, laptops, tablets, scanners, those sorts of things. There should be a procedure or a plan in place to start getting them all that they're like the same OS or same versions of things, because that makes managing them much easier. Again, if I have older operating systems, it's harder to secure them. They might actually be not supported with updates anymore. So what's the plan to update them with everybody else? And is that possible? Sometimes specialty equipment, there is not a application with the newer operating system yet. So you might need to be using the older one until that particular application gets updated. Maybe that's critical for the business. So having everything using the same operating system is helpful for when updates, patches come through. You know it can apply to everything, or this whole particular building or site. Defense in depth, applying multiple layers of defense. That's what we mentioned just a little bit ago. Obviously, having malware and doing updates, software updates is part of the puzzle, but also those kinds of things on your network devices, things like VLANs and subnets and access lists and filtering, and closing ports, and all those are pieces of the puzzle too, of multiple layers of security. Vulnerability reporting, identifying and prioritizing relative security issues. So as you learn about a new malware that comes along, is that a high priority that we need to deal with because it affects a lot of our systems, or is a lower priority of we'll test it and we can implement it when we do the next update? Maybe it is a lower priority. It's like, well, we don't really use that particular application, but it's something we should plan on, putting in. This might actually be a particular staff member in the building that this is their job. This is their job pretty much full time to be looking for that. Implementing, there needs to be a plan to implement. And you might actually do some testing on a work node on the side to implement it, try it, see if there's any problems before you roll it out company-wide. And again, there needs to be a plan on when am I going to do this, and what's my plan if it does cause problems. You don't want to have a whole network get updated and all the systems can't function because of a certain application that's on them. So there needs to be some testing and some plans for implementing. Once it is, did the update go as planned? Is there any issues or any problems? We kind of need a little time period to know all these people have come into work today. Everything seems to be working okay. We're not aware of any issues. We can kind of check it off that things have worked okay. And then what's the future plan to maybe protect against that particular issue? Is there anything by applying a patch that we're good for a while, or is that only a stepping stone to maybe a whole new version of something that we need to implement? Because maybe a particular application is getting end of life and we need a replacement for. So we're looking at what can we do for future. With this, firmware updates on things like routers, switches, access points, those kind of IP phones, those kind of things. Some people do the whole, if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of attitude, but that can open you up to security problems. So some IT teams actually prefer to do this as part of regular updates. They plan for a particular update on pieces of equipment at a certain time and do maybe a planned outage on, like a Sunday afternoon, or, a Sunday at like 6 a.m. when nobody's in there working. You can do a update to, or replace the firmware on routers or switches or whatever, and just notify everybody ahead of time that we're doing an update. There'll be a short outage, blah, blah, blah. Administrative credentials. Most devices can be configured through management console. Like, think about when we configure into the switches and routers for configuration, and there's usually a default account on there. On our routers, there's nothing, but if I were to get think about maybe the router you bought for home, there's a default account on there. Well, obviously, when you get that, you need to change the default login, so it's no longer the default that people could compromise. And when that's done, there needs to be a way to implement that and document that safely, that you have record of that your IT team can get in and access to that, but also have it secured that others are not able to compromise that. Some devices are managed through remote access. That is actually something we're going to do as a part of our lab for this chapter. We're going to do a little bit of remote access with our switches and routers. We're going to do some telnet with our switches and then SSH with our routers and see the difference in those two protocols. But as you see here, using SSH key is much more secure than using passwords. Yes, it is much more secure to have that SSH encryption than just having a plain old password that could be possibly even seen and easily compromised. And again, these credentials should be changed from the provider's default. Absolutely. Many devices offer the option to configure several administrative accounts, where you might have like a user mode and then a privilege mode. Think about the routers and switches we've used. The user mode lets you kind of get in and look around. The privilege mode, the enable mode, privilege mode, allows you to actually make significant changes to. So a lot of devices may have the ability to do more than one level of access. So this privilege access, this higher access, if you will, there should be security precautions for this, including these kind of things here. One is limited use. You basically log in and use that, and when you're done, you log out. You don't stay there. You don't stay in that privileged level. So as an employee, you might have a basic login, and then you might have a administrative login you use for certain tasks, then you'll log out of that and use your regular login. And that's kind of a prevention for possibly making changes that would damage the operating system, etc., etc. Think about if you're using Linux, there's usually a regular login, then there's a root login. Okay, the root log is like super user. You do not stay there. You use your regular login with permissions and maybe use the super user account and then log out as you need. Limited location, some of these can be configured that you only have access at a specific location to do this, to make these high-level changes. You might actually need to be in the closet with the equipment, not through a remote connection kind of thing. Limited duration. You can actually put timeouts on some of these as well, where you can only be in there for a few minutes. When somebody logs out, it times out, you're logged out. So it's not used for any length of time. And you could even put, if it's a vendor, a certain amount of time that they have to come in and do their update, and that's it. And then that account times out. Limited access. The passwords for these accounts should be specifically secure, difficult to crack. Passwords should be also stored securely, when possible, multi-factor authentication, which a lot of us are used to now. Getting a text message on your phone and having to plug that PIN in addition to your account. And for these, usually make the admins or your IT staff know that this is limited privacy. There is logs and records kept of who's logging in and what they're doing, and that's done for two reasons: to make sure you're keeping tabs on what people are doing, but you also have record in case something has changed. You could potentially look at that log or record to know, oops, that was not the change we needed. Let's roll it back. Okay, so making sure your IT staff or admin staff knows that we are logging these. We are logging these for more than one reason. Services and protocols. We mentioned this before. We'll mention it again. Insecure service and protocols such as Telnet FTP should be disabled whenever possible, and using more secure protocols, things like SSH or secure FTP, those kinds of things in favor of. And again, we're going to look at Telnet and SSH in our lab to see why things like Telnet are not used and SSH is preferred. We'll particularly look at those two. To protect devices, use these guidelines, and these are a couple of things that you do. Reduce access path. Shut off any excess like Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, near field communication, IR. Shut any of these things off that are not needed. Again, choose secure protocols. Use SSH in favor of Telnet. Reduce startup processes. If you have a lot of processes to start on boot up of a desktop or server or whatever, minimize that to only the essentials. More things running in the background might open more vulnerabilities or more ports or more possibilities for somebody to hack in. Disable unneeded services. Again, as extra services running means there might be potentially more open doors or back doors. So any of these excess services that are running that you don't need, shut down. You might need to do some research on which ones can be shut down, but this should be researched and slowly, carefully disabled if they're not needed. Declutter software. Disable or uninstall applications you no longer need on desktops and so forth. Get them out of there. Streamline the network. Remove any network segments that are no longer needed. Again, that's an open door, if you will, for people to connect to. Close unused ports. We are going to scan for ports on our devices to see what is open, and that brings up the question of, do we need to discuss this and figure out if this needs to be closed? Okay. Next section, we'll talk about some passwords.